Welcome to this edition of the 700 Club. Is there going to be a war in the Middle East? Is Iran going to be fighting Saudi Arabia? Well, the Congress, nobody in Congress has been briefed on it, and yet the State Department is ordering all non-essential personnel out of Iraq amid growing threats from Iran. What does Iran's supreme leader want? Well, he's also threatening to make weapons-grade uranium. And President Trump is making threats of his own. And we're sort of in the dark, like, where did all this come from? Our Chris Mitchell is now reporting from Jerusalem. Hey, Chris.
President Trump denied a New York Times report the administration has a plan to send 120,000 U.S. troops to the region.
Would I do that? Absolutely. But we have not planned for that. Hopefully, we're not going to have to plan for that. And if we did that, we'd send a hell of a lot more troops than that.
While criticizing U.S. moves in the Persian Gulf as dangerous, Iran's ambassador to Britain added Iran is prepared for any showdown.
We have renounced any escalation, military escalation in the region. I would assure you that Iranian government and Iranian armed forces are fully ready for any eventuality in the region.
Iran accuses the U.S. of deliberately attacking Saudi oil tankers recently in order to blame Iran. Satellite photos and video show the damage to the 4 ships loaded with oil in the Persian Gulf. In the meantime, the U.S. boosted its presence in the region by sending the USS carrier Abraham Lincoln through the Suez Canal and B-52s to Qatar. In the past few days, CBN News joined retired General Jerry Boykin on a fact-finding mission just miles from the Iranian border.
Certainly in Israel, they're a huge threat to Israel, not only because of their growing nuclear capabilities, but because they created and continue to support Hezbollah.
Former Israel ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, maintains the U.S. is not Iran's only Middle Eastern target.
Iran will try to prove that it can plunge the entire Middle East into war. That's the only way it can get out from under the sanctions, from under Secretary of State Pompeo's conditions.
Oren says both the U.S. and Israel see Iran the same way.
Iran, as the administration has said repeatedly, is the greatest source of instability throughout this entire region. It's the world's greatest sponsor of state terrorism in the world.
The Middle East and the world will be waiting to see what turn this high-stakes showdown will take next.
War clouds looming. Our CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now. Chris, a few months ago, the president was talking about pulling troops from Syria. Now we're sending a carrier battle group to the region. What's your word on that?
Well, the big difference, Pat, would be the intelligence that the United States has received, and I can confirm that it was Israel that provided much of that intelligence about credible support, credible attacks by Iranian forces or its proxies against U.S. interests in the region, or perhaps Israeli interests. Pat, one thing person that people really know about in this scenario is General Soleimani. He's with the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. We know that the Trump administration just a few days ago designated that as a terrorist group. So he is one of the main key players in this region, preparing, from what we know, some possible offensive attacks against U.S. interests in the region.
Well, Chris, there was an attack on those tankers. It looks like for sure that's being blamed on Iran. And then they talk about the Houthi rebels out of Yemen are the ones who attacked the pipelines. What could you tell us about that?
Well, the Houthis are just one of these proxy armies that Iran has in the region. So they sent a drone against Saudi Arabia oil pipeline to destroy that. That's just one of the attacks. And then it's pretty sure that it was Iran behind the attacks against those 4 Saudi oil tankers. One other thing to note, Pat, is that Iran has stationed what's called the Shiite militias. They're called the popular mobilization units. They're all over Syria and Iraq. They can be used in any scenario by General Soleimani or the Supreme Leader if they want to attack either U.S. interests. They have 2,000 to 5,000 forces in the U.S. does in Iraq, 2,000 in Syria. So they can be used by Soleimani against U.S. interests. In fact, we saw that firsthand, Pat. We were there last week in an Iraqi Kurdish town of Bashika, overlooking the Nineveh Plain. We could see all that. That is controlled by Shiite militias, and these have been pre-positioned with the pretext of fighting ISIS several years ago, but they're used in any potential scenario, right, by General Soleimani, the supreme leader, and Iran's interests in the region.
Well, you know, Chris, that they've got the Iranian oil refiners at what's called Hark Island, and we could bomb the daylights out of that and put Iran out of business. What can we do against Iran? Are they actually developing nuclear weapons, do you think?
Well, I'm sure they're continuing their Iranian enrichment during even the JCPOA allowed them to do that. So they're continuing that enrichment. So, yes, I think their long-term goals is certainly a nuclear device. But they want to have their ability to hit U.S. interests and possibly Israel as well. I think one thing people need to watch, Pat, is the Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip are also one of those Iranian proxies here in the region. They were the ones that instigated that 700 missiles against Israel just a few days ago. Eurovision, which is the largest talent show in the world, is being hosted in Tel Aviv. So it's a possibility that Islamic Jihad might use that as a target this day. And one thing I'd like to add, Pat, is that you're such a friend of the Kurds. As you saw there on that story, we were just on the Iranian border in an Iraqi Kurdish village. Kurdistan is a key ally, potentially key ally in this geopolitical scenario. They can be a barrier if the U.S. chooses to blunt the ambitions of Iran to build a land bridge all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean. The Kurds, they love Israel, they love the U.S., they love Christians and Jews, and they could be a potential great ally in this battle against Iran and its expansionist goals here in the Middle East.
Chris, you're absolutely right. I thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I've said it over and over again, we need to recognize Kurdistan. We need to recognize the government of Kurdistan. It's a democratic country. They love America, as Chris pointed out. They're wonderful people. And in Erbil, other cities, they're prosperous. They share our values. And they would be eaten up by Turkey and other ISIS and others who would try to come in. They could be a buffer. And it's time for President Trump to put out the Trump doctrine. He could do it just like the same declaration that took place in the Balfour document that recognized the homeland for the Jews in Israel. The United States can say Kurdistan is the home for the Kurds, and we recognize this sovereign nation. There are about 36 million of them, and they would be a buffer against Iran and against other dictatorships that want to come in against us. So I would just, if the president ever happens to watch this program, I would certainly call on him to do that. Yes.
Do the Kurds have a military? Could they defend themselves?
Oh, absolutely. The Peshmerga, they've been fighting for us ever since the Saddam Hussein battle. They're the big fighters that have been in the Middle East against ISIS.
Right, that's right.
Of course,
I forgot about that, yeah.
The Kurds are marvelous fighters, but they've been fighting. That's the reason General Maddox withdrew as Secretary of Defense, because the Trump decision to pull out of the Middle East would have left the Kurds naked and defenseless. And he said, you've abandoned our dear friends. Well, in other news, I think Alabama has gone too far. They've passed a law that would give a 99-year prison sentence to people who could commit abortion. There's no exception for rape or incest. It's an extreme law, and they want to challenge Roe versus Wade. But my humble view is that this is not the case we want to bring to the Supreme Court, because I think this one will lose. John Jessup has more.
Thanks, Pat. The bill that you're talking about, which bans nearly all abortions, now goes to the state's pro-life governor. As Charlene Aaron reports, it's aimed at challenging Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court.
After a contentious debate, the Alabama Senate passed a bill banning most abortions in the state. The bill provides no exemptions except in cases where there's a serious health risk to the unborn child's mother. It also makes performing an abortion a felony. Supporters are hoping appeals will take it to the Supreme Court to challenge the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, which legalized abortion nationwide.
We were trying to keep it just as it was to address the issue that Roe versus Wade was decided on, which is that baby in the womb a person.
I apologize to the women of Alabama for this archaic law that we passed.
Alabama follows a handful of states that have recently enacted laws banning abortion if a fetal heartbeat is detected, usually as early as 6 weeks. Abortion supporters are stepping up the fight on the state level. Lawmakers in Vermont voting to amend the state constitution to protect abortion at any stage of pregnancy for any reason. Pro-lifers say gains in the pro-life movement have abortion advocates in Vermont and elsewhere worried.
There's an optimism in the pro-life movement and a pessimism now in the pro-abortion movement. They're seeing the changes at the federal level, especially with the Supreme Court. They're seeing the actions that President Trump is doing, and they're seeing after 47 years of Roe v. Wade and the devastation that it's caused.
Republican Governor Kay Ivey says she wants to thoroughly review the bill before signing it into law. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And Pat, even though Governor Ivey wants to review the law, many suspect that she will sign it into law.
Well, I think it's ill-considered. I think we ought to do it, but Roe versus Wade was a put-up case. It was a phony case. Norma McCovey, who was the plaintiff, has disavowed her role in the whole thing. It was an ACLU job that depended on the so-called right of privacy that went back to a Connecticut case. And it was called Blackman's abortion. It was so badly conceived. But nevertheless, it didn't just ban abortion in the first trimester, which is what Roe versus Wade said. It's been expanded to anything having to do with abortion, anything that would stop a woman from having abortion. And I was so shocked when Hillary Clinton, in that debate with Donald Trump, said she was for partial birth abortion. And partial birth means that the baby has left the birth canal and is partially being presented as a human being, and a doctor can then punch holes in the child's skull and suck its brains out. That's partial birth, and she was in favor of that and wouldn't want any restriction on that. Now, that's how extreme they are, and I'm afraid that the Vermont bill might have the same kind of effect. It's not something that we want to deal with. I think it's time that we stop. We've aborted over 60 million babies since Roe versus Wade, and the restrictions on any kind of restriction of abortion have been extraordinary. But the Alabama case, God bless them, they're trying to do something, but I don't think that's the case that I'd want to bring to the Supreme Court. John?
Pat, Democratic presidential frontrunner Joe Biden is taking flack from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over climate change, highlighting the rift between the party's old guard and its progressive wing. The freshman Congresswoman is trying to rally support for her Green New Deal, which critics say will cost trillions of dollars. Biden's campaign reportedly is shaping a policy that appeals to both environmentalist and blue-collar voters. Monday, Ocasio-Cortez made a veiled jab at the former VP for not taking action over decades.
And I will be if the same politicians who refused to act then are going to try to come back today and say we need a middle of the road approach to save our lives. That is too much for me.
And Pat, Biden responded saying he's not middle of the road and he does believe climate change is a threat.
Isn't it amusing that a great political party is being led around by the nose by a young lady who I think used to be a bartender, cocktail waitress or something?
She had a number of jobs. But,
yeah,
people say, that her appeal is that she's herself, that she's she's very authentic. And even if you don't agree with her, at least she's presenting something she's passionate about, which a lot of the Democrats have not done.
Well, that may be, but I'm telling you, if I were a mature man and to be led around by the nose by a young girl who has no knowledge whatsoever of climate change, no knowledge of the science of any of these things she's so, quote, passionate about. Who cares how passionate if they're passionately wrong? John?
Pat, comedic legend Tim Conway has passed away. He was 85 years old. The beloved actor kept audiences laughing for more than 50 years, best known for his work on The Carol Burnett Show. Over the course of his lifetime, he earned 5 Emmys, a Golden Globe, and many other awards. Conway, who appeared on the 700 Club back in 2007, said his faith in God inspired his clean comedy. He died Tuesday morning in Los Angeles from water on the brain and is survived by his wife of 35 years, 7 children, and 2 grandchildren. Pat, I like what he said. He said, I think the Midwest is the heart of his comedy. Midwesterners were just more laid back, more understanding, and had a kinder sense of humor.
Well, Tim's a great guy. He was so nice. He liked horses, and I showed him one of the horses I was working. We have a wonderful time, but I didn't bring forth some of the comedy. He's one of the funniest people who ever lived, and the Carol Burnett Show was so popular because of him and Harvey Korman, and it was a great team.
It was truly a funny show. It was laugh out loud, and it was clean. And,
totally.
You know, he will be greatly missed.
Well, we mourn his passing. He was a light in the Hollywood star. Okay.